So, transportation, so a lot of people say, oh, we should have done this better, we should have had more investment in transport and MRT and so on. And this is something that we are doing more of now. So could we have done this better and, anticipated more? So it's always useful to think about the context. Roughly, if for an MRT line, if you want to build an MRT line, right, it costs something like $10 to $20 billion for a fairly straightforward line, sometimes a lot more if you have to do a lot of tunneling and so on. That's the cost, and the time it takes to do it, from the original time you start planning and thinking that I've done all my market assessment and I think we need this, to then sinking something in the ground and then finally completing it, can be anything from 10 to 15 years. That's the kind of lead time we are looking at. So let's think back. The issue for us was, when should we have made decisions on some of the infrastructure needs that we have today? So we should have really have done that sometime around the late 90s or early 2000 in Singapore. Now, I think some of you all should have been born by then, I think, right? Late 90s, early 2000, but perhaps not as aware of some of the issues which I want to talk to you about. The circumstances at that time were quite challenging. Why were they challenging? Because first, we had the Asian financial crisis, the Tom Yum effect from Thailand, and it came right through. And all the economies of Southeast Asia were facing down a cliff. Indonesia was in bad shape, South Korea was having a hard time, and in fact, people were wondering how and whether we can recover from this. So that was one of the biggest issues at that time, and it took several years for things to stabilize and actually start to uptick. And that's around 1997, 1998. Then just when we thought things were getting all right, we had this other thing called SARS. You're familiar with this, I'm assuming. And this had a real chilling effect, certainly in Asia and also globally to some extent. But basically all our economic activity, tourism, general, people were afraid to go out. I mean, we talk about N95 masks and the haze, but at that time, the concerns were very deep, and we had several, 100 over people in Singapore, if I recall correctly, lost their lives to this disease. And we had a major exercise to try and not just recover from a healthcare point of view, but also from an economic point of view again. So when you're in that kind of environment, first of all, what is your situation? The demand for our infrastructure was nowhere near the capacity we had. In fact, our MRT trains and buses and all were actually in pretty good shape. And at the same time, you don't really want to spend a lot of money, public funds, because you're accountable to the public, to Singaporeans, right? So why do you want to spend this amount of money incurring costs to build infrastructure when the present day needs and even what you can project looking ahead didn't seem so large? So that's the truth of the matter. If you look at it, that was the context of that environment. When did things change? Things actually changed fast and very dramatically, probably in this around 2006 or so, when we embarked on a bunch of projects to try and push Singapore into a new level, economically speaking, to create more opportunities for our people. So when we started doing that, and when you start these things, sometimes the response can be very lagged, sometimes it can be very fast. In our situation, it took off fairly fast. Then we ran into a roadblock because of this global financial crisis in 2008, 2009. And then after 2009, it really picked up very sharply. So could we have been, could we have had, better foresight? I think we could have tried to do a lot more modeling and simulations and so on. But some of the things I've just described to you are what people in the in economics or in industry will call, they're kind of like black swan events. You really don't know where this is going to come from. You don't even know what it is. Who would have anticipated a Tom Yum effect? Who would have anticipated SARS? These are things you don't know. Who would have anticipated that Lehman Brothers, one of the oldest financial institutions, will completely collapse? AIG, the world's largest insurance company, was on danger of going bankrupt. I mean, these are really difficult things to anticipate. So what does that mean? You can build capacity in your system for some buffer, right? So unanticipated events. But how much do you build in? 10%? 20%? At some point, If you have too much capacity, it becomes waste. Correct? It's excess capacity. So you need to find the optimization, and you're trying to do that against the background of a lot of things that are changing and unanticipated events. So why am I going through this with you? Today, we are now embarking on a major program to enhance our transport infrastructure. If you've been following the news, we're going to spend something of the order of magnitude, I think it's $50 to $60 billion over the next 15 years to enhance our MRT system. This is going to, you're going to see the impact of this progressively over the next 10 to 15 years. Some will happen in the, in the rest of this decade, and then some of the big lines will come on stream in by early 2020s and the later part of that decade. So we're going to have more MRT. We are also putting a lot of money into buses. You may know that we put in what they call a bus services enhancement, $1 billion, which we are working with the bus companies to say, look, let's have more buses and better frequencies and train the drivers and so on and so forth. Why are we doing that? Because we know the trains will take longer. We're trying to see how we can improve frequency and through signaling and all that. But at the same time, let's try and take care of some of this through the buses. So transport is an irritation. I mean, if it doesn't go right, you encounter it every day, whether it's on a bus, on a train, in a taxi, in your car. When you have something that doesn't go quite right, it can completely upset you for the day. So I can well understand this, and we all feel it. But you must understand that also, when we're making decisions and trying to provide for these sorts of things at a national level, there are so many moving parts. This is not an excuse for not doing things, but it is an explanation that we should have things in the right context. So having gone through what we went through, if we repeat this thing again, then I think there is a flaw in our system. So we have completely compensated for it, overcompensated even, you could say, and we are now investing significantly in transport infrastructure, and it will take some time. We're also doing some things to modify the behavior of people, I mean, I don't know how many of you are doing economics, but behavioral economics is a big thing. So for example, free MRT into the CBD before 7:30 if you get out of the train. So I know some people take the train from Bedok, come in the CBD, then get out, so they get the free ride, then they go back in just to do a short hop down to wherever it is, and so on. But the point, why do we do that? Basically, in economics, you call it peak pricing. When there's a high demand for something that you have, you price it higher. When you have low demand, you price it lower, so that people will hopefully shift their demand, right, to the off-peak period. Why do we want to do that? Because it is better to spend a few tens of millions of dollars to get people to shift their demand and behavior than to try and spend, to spend billions of dollars to try and cater for MRT capacity for the peak, right? So that's one of the reasons why we're doing some of these other tweaks in the system as well. The specific point, what can we do on transportation? So we are trying to do all these things I just described, and we will try and do more. Does it mean that we will have no hiccups? No way. No one can guarantee that. And there will always be unanticipated events. I mean, you look at the contractor who went bust, who was doing the Bukit Timah line. That's delaying the project by at least 6 months. I suspect it may be longer. And this is totally unanticipated. This is an Austrian company with a good track record, but they've gone bust. Nothing to do with the project in Singapore, by the way. It's their parent company. So these are the kinds of issues for you. I think you need to be aware of why we are trying our best, but sometimes, notwithstanding our best efforts, things don't seem to be going as well as they should. And we are, used to a very high standard in Singapore. I mean, by most comparisons, we hold up all right, not too bad at all. But our standards are very high, quite rightly so, I would say. And then, as we aspire for that, you must expect that there will be times when some things may go wrong.